3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29,
morning, everyone. Good morning. First of all, thank you for being here. Congratulations to the joint venture partner selectees. Delighted to have you here. Looking forward to a really great morning agenda. First, I think most of you have the agenda, but let's kind of go through that real quick. I'll be doing a few intro remarks about the nature and scope of what this effort is about. Dr. Shyam Sunder, the Senior Science Advisor to the Deputy Secretary of Commerce, will provide an overview of the JV Authority. Shyam is, I call him kind of the chairman of the board. He's been instrumental in leading us to achieve this effort. We will then, very fortunate to have Henry Wixson, Chief Counsel, and Melissa Lieberman in the audience, who were instrumental in putting together the JV agreement. I know many of you have a copy of that, and basically we'll have an opportunity to go through some Q&As in that. Then we may be interrupted in the middle for the Honorable Bruce Andrews to come here and give a few words on his keynote about the importance of this effort. Greg Capella will be going through the program development process, something that I know that you'll be interested in, about how do we actually get some work done together. And then we'll have open discussion about all the different questions that you may have asked. This is the beginning of a process, so we may not be able to answer all the questions, but I think this is really great that you're here physically to really have this interactive engagement. And then, we haven't done this before. This is something totally new, and I think we're building a new operating model. I think you'll be able to help us think through what we should be doing going forward. So let me talk a little bit about the whole mission, vision, and strategy. I've been in the private sector for 24 years. I've been in the federal government for 16 years, worked in a number of different positions, but I came here because I'm just thoroughly excited about the opportunity of what this new operating model will be able to accomplish through this partnership. We talk a lot about federal-private sector working together to accomplish, federal priorities, but I think this is really a data-centric innovation approach that will be transforming how we deliver services to federal agencies. NTIS will be working with federal agencies, these are the customers, to uncover opportunities. And then where you basically come in is you have lots of the capabilities in data science and products, tools, and services to work with NTIS to support federal agencies. Now, you're here today because you submitted your proposal, you've been selected, you have the JV agreement in place to review at least, and you basically are going to be asking the questions that I would be asking. Sounds great, but like what happens next? How do we do this? How do we actually make a living supporting these federal agencies? Who's doing what? What about the opportunities? How do we find out about them? What are some of the key next steps? How will we continue to interact with each other in the coming years? These are all basic questions, and I hope that we'll be able to address that. Just to reiterate quickly, and some of this will be familiar from your response to the Federal Register notice back in July, is let's just really hone in on the message here. What is it that we're trying to accomplish for federal agencies? We're providing innovative data services to federal agencies through joint venture partnerships with the private sector, with you, to advance federal data priorities and promote economic growth and enable operational excellence. Sounds very high level. We're going to do some deep dives. Now, this unique operating model is a way for us to really bridge and connect the gap between federal data priorities and the wonderful skill sets that you have in conjunction with the NTIS JV Authority to really become a catalyst and a curator of many of these services. So when we talk about advancing federal data priorities, And throughout this presentation, I will try to take you from the 10,000-foot level to something concrete. So when we say advanced federal data priorities, because federal agencies are our basic customers, what exactly does that mean? It falls into two categories. One, I would say, is driving economic growth. The other has to do with driving operational excellence. Driving economic growth. It's not enough to have open data. Taxpayers spend millions, assisting federal agencies collect, process, and ultimately disseminate information. We as a federal government, need to do a much better job of providing that data back in some consumable, meaningful way, back to communities, back to businesses, to really help generate economic growth. Now, the other aspect of that is operational excellence. What does that mean? And frankly, I believe that is going to be a huge portion of the nature of the business that we're going to be doing together. Federal agencies are struggling in how to deliver on their federal data priorities because, frankly, they don't have all the data science skills that they need. They don't have access to the various tools that are out there. So the question is, that's really how NTIS and you will be delivering the services. What specifically are we going to be delivering? We're going to be working with you to make this data much more accessible, consumable, discoverable, searchable, and then be able to integrate and interoperate with lots of different data sets so that we can create a 1 + 1 = 3 value proposition back to communities, businesses, and the public in general. You in the audience also have unique capabilities for data analytics, data analysis, and some of the other ones that I'll be going through. Lots of great talk about the possibilities of the Internet of Things, smart city initiatives, all the wonderful things that can happen. But in fact, working with you, we can take these kind of Venn diagram circles and really integrate them to deliver something that is very innovative for federal agencies. I like to use this slide because it really speaks to the problem that we're trying to address. First of all, what is unique about this JV authority is that it allows us, NTIS, working with you, to front load the planning process through a discussion with the agencies who have the issues. Greg, later on in his presentation, will take you through the actual approach of how that happens. Now, most of open data initiatives today have to do with collect the data, describe the data, visualize the data, and diagnose the data. We really need to move up the food chain here so that we can become much more predictive and prescriptive of how we deliver value to federal agencies. Now, this is not like rocket science. It's been done before. If you look at, I use Waze to get to work. It's a nice closed network with lots of data, and it allows me to make real-time decisions about the fastest way to get to work. Same models have been come up with Uber and many other companies. So it's not like rocket science in a way. It is very possible, but we need to find a way through a new operating model to make this information much more useful. So we want to move up the food chain, if you will, to become much more predictive and then prescribe. If you look at agencies like FEMA, who need to react to potential disasters, it's insufficient to collect data about what happened and then overlay that with, let's say, American Community Survey data from the Census Bureau. What if we could be able to predict in advance what in fact will happen by getting better access to information that may reside in sensors, whether the sensors are in the sewers, in traffic lights, lots of possibilities to integrate multiple data sets that are both open, closed, from around the country. So we're really trying to move up the food chain here. But how can we do that? The federal government, as I mentioned before, really lacks a lot of the basic skills. And the approach that we have used to date has been, frankly, time-consuming. By the time you come up with requirements, by the time you do the analysis, by the time you get through evaluations. Everything is basically overtaken by events. So if we could front load the planning process that we'll go through and then leverage all of the skill sets that you have, this particular slide really has extracted a lot of the information from those who have been selected, and they demonstrate a wealth of capabilities that we would like to use to really solve problems. I think it was October the 19th, there was a press release that announced most of the partners. That there may be one or two who will wait to announce their presence until we have the actual agreements in place. But when you look at these organizations, we had unprecedented response to this. So you should be feeling particularly fortunate to be part of this new team, because it says a lot about your capabilities, and we went through this pretty intense, rigorous, merit-based process to select you. So that means that you folks in the room really bring to bear some unique capabilities. Now, always the question is, what's in it for me? The what's in it for me for federal agencies is they'll be able to transform the delivery of critical government data services through this unique partnership. They will have access to timely, relevant, agile capabilities in data science, in professional services, in unique tools and products to help them with their time to market, time to value. For the NTIS and the JV partners, we're going at this as a partnership. So you in the audience will have an opportunity through a merit-based process that we're setting up to participate in many of the opportunities that will be forthcoming. It's not the only instrument, I will say up front, for you to participate in this. The federal government has many mechanisms for engaging with federal agencies and the public. This is one additional capability, but it affords a very unique opportunity in that it front-loads the planning process, it promotes a conversation and a discussion at a very early stage so that we are going to be defining the right problems and not solving the wrong things down the road. Now, this little chevron slide is really one that is very important because this now begins to, and Greg will take you through more detail later, this begins to take you through the process of, okay, so how do we actually get started? How do we do business with you? Well, the very first step that Henry will talk about will be the fact that we need to have the JV agreement in place. And you have a copy of that. It's not something that needs to be done, of course, today. You have time to review that. But frankly, I would love to be in a situation that in 30 days, we've got the agreements in place and we're just ready to rock and roll. So I'm really hoping for that. But here's the way it works. It's essentially a three-step process, and I will just do this at a high level, and Greg can get into the details. But it's the ideation, conceptualization, and then the actual proposal-based process. From start to finish, we're looking at ideally 60 to 90 days. Step number one, ideation. NTIS, together with federal agencies, will be identifying the specific opportunities. And at that point in time, the federal agency will already have a problem statement or requirement statement that's available to look at. NTIS will then work, and at this point you're not even involved yet, okay? NTIS will be working with the federal agency to make sure that in fact they have framed the problem statement in such a way that it will lead to solving the right problem. Based on the input that we provide to them, we will have a refined problem statement. At this point in time, once that's done, all of you now begin to get engaged. Not one company that has a certain skill set, not another company that may have two skill sets. All of you who are the 35 or so JVP partners will be exposed to this opportunity, okay? At this point in time, you will have the capability working through NTIS to further ask questions about what are we trying to accomplish here? This front loading of the planning process provides you an opportunity to ask some really pointed questions to make sure that we are in fact solving the right problem. It is after that process that the problem statement will be refined. And once that's done, it'll be released to all of you in an opportunity to basically bid on the work. And I think there's some tremendous advantages both for you, being in the private sector, to really not waste a lot of money, chasing things that may necessarily not result in anything. It allows you to really focus on unique opportunities. And for NTIS, it really provides an opportunity to help these agencies solve the right problems to begin with. After that conceptual phase, and we go through the proposal, then we actually move to implementation. The major assumption here is that the sponsoring agency has the money to move forward in this. So again, this is not a process of having lots of discussions and wasting your time. There has to be a real problem, there has to be funding behind that, and we're going to work to get things done as quickly as possible. A question that will come up is, well, the federal government has lots of different instruments for doing this. This is not something new. There are clearly grants, there's challenges, there's codathons, there are contracts. Some of you in the audience may say, well, I have an existing vehicle in place with a federal agency, and I'm already doing that work. So what does this thing fit in? This approach, this JVP, is not meant to replace these things. This is merely an additional instrument that we have at our disposal to drive economic growth and operational excellence. Now, how do you know if this is the right approach to take? Well, if this involves the use of emerging technologies, especially in the whole data science field, to deal with issues around interoperability, if the actual architecture that's required to do this it's complicated, there's risk involved, new use of technologies and in cloud computing, new capabilities in data analytics, there's actually some risk involved because maybe it's not going to work. We need to experiment. We really need to have an adaptive, agile application development process that allows us to make changes if we need to. We cannot be locked into a specific statement of capabilities or work. We need to have some flexibility here. Back when I was on the other side at the Census Bureau and the Internal Revenue Service, I typically would stay away from first-of-a-kind, risky system integration capabilities that could take us down a road that we actually don't want to go. This is a different case. In this case, we're actually doing new things, so if it involves some of this risk, we will have the appropriate guardrails and it'll be self-contained. But I just want to highlight some of the initial attributes of what these opportunities could look like, and these will be addressed as NTIS meets with federal agencies. You should know that as of today, as of actually several years ago, we already have a joint venture partnership in place with many partners. Some of them are already engaged and working. The main difference between the legacy and the new approach was essentially defined in the Federal Register notice, I think, back in July, and then you responded to that. We want to go back to the market. We want to go back to our customers and offer them very specific data services that are aligned with the Commerce Data Goal, the Commerce Data Mission that I think the Honorable Deputy Secretary of Commerce, Bruce Andrews, will cover when he appears here a little bit later today. So we have a JVP agreement in place. You in the audience, once the new agreement is signed, I don't want to give a specific date, but just for estimation purposes, I would say by the end of January, very beginning of February, I would like to be able to work with all of you, and then of course we'll have the signed agreements in place to begin to explore the new opportunities And the other agreements that we have in place, in fact, will have to be sunset with the exception of those that already have ongoing projects. This particular example was just to illustrate that we talked about two classes of opportunities, driving economic growth and operational excellence. This is an existing partner that's working with NTIS to deal with issues around Medicare fraud, applying data science and analytic capabilities. So it's just simply to illustrate the fact that the types of work that we're going to be doing on could be anything from a couple of, type of projects on unemployment and opportunity, leveraging census, housing data, connecting them, interoperating with them to achieve economic growth. But some of them really speak to, the issues that many agencies are dealing because they've got all these silos of data and lack of standards and lack of interoperability. So rather than you basically trying to go in there as a one-off through this boutique that we have established, we will have the unique opportunity to bring our smarts together. And it's not just you individually. Because of this partnership, there will be opportunity for you to not just leverage the existing partners that you came to market with, but actually get to know the people in the audience because there may be opportunities to create some synergies amongst yourself. So I basically kind of said that in almost like one breath, but that was the high level of what this thing is about. And so the bottom line here is that this is really a unique opportunity. I'm thoroughly excited about this. I came from the Census Bureau after spending about 6 years there as their CTO and working on many of these data type issues. And then when I found out about the fact that we can actually go to a market like this together and really solve problems, that was a big wow factor, and that's why I made the decision to come here. So I just can't wait to get started working on stuff and stop talking about it. So that'll be part of the interaction that we'll have today. At this point in time, I want to introduce Dr. Shyam Sunder. He has been, I've worked with him for quite a few years. The NTIS organization has gone through a transition, especially as it had to refocus its attention on the whole data mission. And frankly, if it wasn't for his leadership, he has actually helped recruit myself and Greg. He has just been totally instrumental. And the value that he provides is really providing the contextual framework or the context, the guardrails. And I think you need to hear from him and really understand how he got to this point. So with that, I would like to introduce Shyam, and then have you kind of take you through this. This will be, and at some point in time, and then Shyam, you'll introduce Henry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avi. It's really a pleasure and a joy to be here at this event. It's been in the works for 2 years. You may not know this, but yes, it has been 2 years. 2 years ago, the Deputy Secretary asked me to look at NTIS because there were bills pending in Congress to eliminate the agency. It had been doing business, originally set up in the aftermath of World War II to help with dissemination of federal publications. You know, the whole focus on research and development through the Vannevar Bush era that led to the growth in federal R&D and then the dissemination of physical reports, information to the world. And they have served in that capacity for a number of years. What has happened since then, of course, is the internet has come in and has completely disrupted the universe in which NTIS operates, and the world gets information about publications and so forth. So the relevance of this agency was questioned. And then, of course, beyond that, there's been some changes in the way the agency focused away from its traditional core mission to focus on services. And a lot of those services, while broadly within the scope of the NTIS mission, was not focused on its core mission. So what we have done in the last 2 years, really led by the Secretary of Commerce, Penny Pritzker, the Deputy Secretary, and the Undersecretary for Standards and Technology, Willie May, is to look very carefully at NTIS, its authorities, its mission, its operations, and figure out what does it need to be in the 21st century. And that's essentially what we have done. What the Secretary did after that review in June 2015 was to say that NTI should be evolved consistent with its existing authorities as an information disseminator toward a focus on the department's and federal data priorities and transition away from services that are not aligned with those priorities. And to help the department oversee and guide that evolution, they established an oversight board. I have been involved as chair of that oversight board. The composition of the oversight board has changed a little bit in the last 6 months, but the focus of the oversight board really is to guide the evolution of NTIs toward this new mission and transition away from services not aligned with that mission. So we have 4 areas of priority. One is to refocus the programs on federal data priorities, and Avi explained to you how we are looking at that domain. Second is to strengthen the stewardship and governance of its unique authorities and operations. NTIS has this joint venture authority which is unique in the federal government in many regards. And what it allows us to do is essentially set a new set of governance procedures to collaborate among the private sector and the federal government in providing services. And how we use this unique authority is going to determine whether or not this passes muster in Congress and on the American taxpayer in terms of a level playing field for everybody. And if there's any appearance that this is a circumventing of the acquisition rules or any such thing, you can be sure there will be great attention brought to this agency, and has been in the past, but we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So that's what the Oversight Board is trying to do. Third, we want to make sure that internal capacity, organizational capacity and capability is built to support this mission. That includes both internal capacity, but also this new group of joint venture partners that you all represent. And finally, we want to make sure we are effectively communicating with Congress and with our customers in federal agencies and partners. The members of that oversight board are here. I think the only point I would stress is it is really a who's who of the different department equities that are interested in this, all the way from NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which really is the umbrella organization to which NTIS reports and gets a number of services from, including legal services. ESA, the Economics and Statistics Administration, which has a very strong interest in data and is represented on the Oversight Board as a co-chair, and Burton Reist, I saw him somewhere. There he is. Put your hands up. He joined the team in about 5-6 months ago, and so we've been collaborating in this effort. And then we have, of course, the Office of the General Counsel in the department, as well as the Chief Financial Officer to make sure we're managing the finances well and evolving correctly. And then, of course, the Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs, who is really helping us with engaging with the Hill. Now, this oversight board's success really rests in putting itself out of business, right? And one of the ways to put ourselves out of business as an oversight board is to institutionalize the changes that we're talking about. And since you've heard a lot about personnel is policy or policy is personnel in the last 2-3 days, well, we have new leaders for NTIS, Avi Bender and Greg Capella, who are charged with carrying out this transformation of NTIS. And I will say that it's exciting. Both of them have private sector experience. So some of you will recognize the firms where these people have worked. Actually, Greg's company is not listed, but he worked for Fair Isaacs for a long time. And both of them have federal experience. One in the Department of Homeland Security, the other one at the IRS and the Census Bureau. So we have incredibly capable people who understand this domain and who recognize that business as usual will not work, and they also have a vision for where to take this agency. So we're thrilled about that. How does NTIS fit within the Department of Commerce? The Commerce Department has 5 strategic goals in its strategic plan that was released a couple years ago. One of those 5 goals is data. Think about it. We also have the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, which is part of Commerce. We have the Census Bureau. We have the Bureau of Economic Analysis. We have the Office of the Chief Economist. We have the International Trade Administration, the Bureau of Industry and Security, and I can go on and give you a large number of bureaus in the Commerce Department where data is a very important part of what they do for the U.S. economy. And as the Secretary likes to call us, the America's Data Agency, the focus of this new goal that's been in place for the last 3 years is to spur innovation inside and outside the federal government. And I don't need to preach to this group the importance of data, not just data at rest, which is where we normally think about a lot of data. Get it out means it's data at rest, but it's also data in motion. Everything to do with the Internet of Things, the industrial internet, with smart cities is all data in motion. And really, the mission of the department and the mission of NTIS, which is to collect and disseminate information, are actually very synergistic. We just hadn't made that connection, and we just hadn't focused it that way. So in its new role, we believe NTIS will deliver exceptional value by serving as a center of excellence in meeting the 21st century national need, which is the data economy that we're really witnessing right now. So you saw the mission statement, and that's the guiding statement for NTIS into the future, but part of its vision is to be really focused by innovation. And innovation through emerging technology, complexity, adaptive scoping, and or unique requirements. So if it is something you can buy off the shelf, you shouldn't be working with NTIS through its joint venture program. So we have this 4-step process: ideate, conceptualize, propose, and implement. And I want to just elaborate a little bit on the ideate portion, and I think Avi explained the process as it is supposed to kind of routinely roll out, which is the agency and NTIS define the problem. So it is, that's how it's done. But I do want to make sure we have your creative process in that NTIS is a beneficiary of your creative process in dreaming up those problems. And if you do have thoughts for problems, bring them to NTIS. Don't take them to the agency. That would not work. So what you have to do is, if you have ideas for problems, discuss them with NTIS, and NTIS will then engage the agency. That's my only clarification part to what Avi had mentioned. The key part of the JV is its collaborative structure. But there are some guardrails that we have to follow, okay? So if you have ever thought about the innovation matrix, the domain is defined. The domain that we're going to be working in is advancing federal data priorities. That is the domain. Anything outside that is not within scope. 2, so that who defines the domain? The NTIS mission defines the domain. The problem is also defined. Who defines the problem? The federal agency, NTIS, working with the federal agency, defines the problem. And that problem must require those innovative data services that were in the Federal Register, and I will remind you again what those are. And it has to be within that scope. The solution is not defined. This is where this partnership comes into play. And it's a collaborative solution environment where we have a highly flexible, interactive, and collaborative kind of environment in which these defined problems are solved by this collaborative venture. A few guiding principles on how the authority is going to be used, the joint venture authority. First, everything is going to be merit-based. Just look around you, and if you read the press release, you all know who the other selectees are, minus one company that's actually in the room but not listed in the press release. But all 35 organizations, which includes, by the way, 4 universities as well as 2 nonprofits, are interested in working on NTI's problems. So we have to make sure we provide a level playing field to all 35 organizations. And that will be done using a merit-based process. We didn't say a competitive process, we said a merit-based process. What that means is, just like we did this summer, when you all responded to the proposal request through the Federal Register notice request for proposals, those were reviewed by 3 independent subject matter experts from different agencies in the department, none from NTIS. Then the selecting official, Greg Capella, made a decision after a consultation process which included Avi, me, and Burton sitting in a room for 3 days, going through every one of those proposals and the reviews that were done. And in that consultation process, we looked at the inputs from the technical reviews, we looked at the distribution across the 4 areas we talked about, and we looked at the distribution across the different kinds of firms, sizes of the firms. All of those procedures were listed in the Federal Register notice. So it was a merit process. We picked them, each of these companies and organizations, because they met a need and they were within the criteria we had actually given to you ahead of time. In the same manner, when we have a project opportunity, all 35 of you will find out about that project opportunity, and you will have an opportunity to express your interest in writing a proposal or not. That is a key part here. And in fact, in the ideation process, there will be a session for every problem where the agency, NTIS, and the partners will be invited. So after 35, maybe 10 people are interested in a particular problem. They show up, they have back and forth question and answer, they go back, the problem statement is refined, the companies have a good understanding of the problem statement is finalized and put out to all 35 companies and organizations, and whoever is interested submits a proposal. It doesn't have to be all 35, it could be 5, it could be 10. But they will then go through a merit review process. So I just want you to be aware, this is what Avi and Greg are committed with the help of the Chief Counsel's Office to make sure you all have a merit-based process to get selected to work on projects. I want to give you a little bit of a flavor for these 3 different things. Avi talked about the federal data priorities and what they are. And let me kind of give you a little bit more granular sense of what they are. The economic growth portion really deals with unleashing federal data that makes it easier for external stakeholders, businesses, communities, citizens, to use federal data either alone or in combination with non-federal data. It is the most closely aligned with open data priorities, but let me just make it clear, we're talking about data that is actually much more actionable and usable than has traditionally been the case. Second, we also want to be able to stimulate private sector to develop new products and services using that federal data. So those 2 are more externally focused. Now, operational excellence also has 2 parts. One is externally focused, one is internally focused. The first one is transforming the delivery of critical government data services for the American people. What does that mean? So one example would be the work that we are doing, currently NTIS is doing, with the Department of Homeland Security in the immigration, citizenship and immigration services. And what they're doing is really developing a platform by which people can apply for change in status, and then Department of Homeland Security analyzes that information, makes decisions, and then communicates back to the people who applied. Now, you might think, well, is that a website or is that a data platform? It's probably both. But it is a data platform because what you're doing is really transmitting PII information, personally identifiable information, which needs to be kept secure. You're doing analytics on it, you're doing decision making on it, and then you're communicating a decision back to the applicant. So that has to be secure, it has to be kept private. There's lots of interesting issues associated with that. And those types of issues, and there are many other examples, and I won't get into things like healthcare.gov and so on, but you all know this. There's a second set of priorities that deal with the internal operations of the government, which is how do you improve the internal operations of the government to increase the efficiency, effectiveness, and productivity of government programs. That's a whole different thing. And I think a great example of that is really the complete transformation of the 2020 census, where they're going from platforms that are going to be using information technology in a very big way to reduce the cost of the census by $4 to $5 billion. And that's not something NTIS is working on necessarily, but it's a place where some unique, innovative data services could be provided by NTIS. And I have 2 more minutes, and I have 2 more slides, I think. Innovative data services we talked about, and I want to just reiterate, in the Federal Register notice, we had 4 areas: use of federal data, sharing of federal data, analytics, and then deep analytics. Okay? These were chosen purposely. We wanted to go from things that were like usability, security, privacy, to discovery, accessibility, interoperability, to statistical methods and visualization and geospatial, ultimately to things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, cognitive analytics, and so on. So kind of a spectrum of more lower-hanging fruit to the more esoteric or more complex types of services. And the group here represents all four of them. And that really defines the problem. Every problem that this group works on has to involve one or more of these services. They have to be innovative. And then finally, the use of the joint venture authority is going to be the one that allows you to collaboratively solve the problem, the collaborative solution development piece. So if your solution that you're developing, well, let me put it this way. The solution that we're developing collaboratively will involve emerging technology, complexity, adaptive scoping, and that, by the way, is our shorthand for agile DevOps approaches, and unique requirements. So it's not a bunch of commercial off-the-shelf products in which you just slap on a little bit of configure and install and do a little bit of systems integration, but it's a lot of unique coding of the solution space. Now, doesn't mean you cannot use commercial products. It's like paper and pencil. When you write literature, you still need paper and pencil. So if you need storage, you need various kinds of other scalable solutions, commercial solutions and platforms to do the work we have to do, but the innovation is at the center of what we do with the joint venture authority. So in summary, I think NTIS is very well positioned to move into this new direction, which is really an important area for the federal government. I will say that the new leadership is in place. We have new joint ventures in place, and the sooner you sign those agreements, the sooner we can get started. And thank you so much. And what I'd like to do is introduce you now to Henry Vixen, the Chief Counsel for NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, as well as the National Technical Information Service. They all share the same letters, but they're different agencies.
Well, thank you very much, Sham. It's wonderful to be here this morning to see so many smiling joint venture faces. Avi and Sham and Greg have been working very hard to get to this point today, and it's been a real pleasure to work with them. And I want to acknowledge, with respect to the agreement, first of all, the efforts that they've put into coming up with a structure that will define the relationship between the joint venture partners, each of you out there, and the Institute, the NTIS, the service, and also acknowledge the efforts of the other lawyers in my group, including Melissa Lieberman, my deputy, who's over there. Wave if you are working with us going forward on an agreement. You may be interacting with her, as well as Brian Lieberman, no relation, who works for NTIS in my office as a lawyer there, as well as Hassan Nasser. So we've all been working quite hard, and one point I'd like to make at the outset is that with respect to this agreement, it's gone through two levels of review. That is, my office, the Office of the Chief Counsel, has reviewed it and has blessed it, as it were. And then in addition, typically NTIS agreements get reviewed by the General Law Division of the Office of the General Counsel. That division has reviewed this template, and it has waived further review of individual agreements going forward, provided that the terms of those agreements do not vary from the template. So in order to try to satisfy the very aggressive time frame that Avi articulated a little bit earlier to get going on these projects, I just want to emphasize the fact that if we lawyers are not negotiating terms of these templates, we can get them signed very, very quickly. And so with that, I'll just hit some of the highlights. I know that you've received already a copy of the full template agreement, so I don't want to belabor any of the points, but I just want to hit a couple of the highlights with respect to the nature of the relationship, the roles of the parties that are outlined in this agreement. So the first section of the agreement simply recites NTIS's unique authority, about which you've heard a great deal, and there's no need to go into that further except to point out that it is a rather unique authority, this joint venture authority that we are taking advantage of in order to meet the data mission of the department. One of the things that this agreement does is it makes clear a very important point, which is that with respect to the federal client agency, NTIS will be the focal point of that interaction. And that is very important for you as joint venture partners to keep in mind, because that will be an important element of NTIS's role, and it will be important that you understand, recognize, and adhere to that going forward with respect to the relationship that you will have. And so in this slide here, we point out in Section 2 of the agreement that if a joint venture partner becomes aware of an opportunity, then we expect that they will bring it to NTIS in order to allow NTIS to evaluate it using the criteria that have been articulated already this morning, and to make a determination of how to proceed. And that is not a role that the joint venture partner will have. In other words, going directly to a potential federal client agency is not something that we expect that you will be doing as a joint venture partner to NTIS under this agreement. And so NTIS will make the ultimate determination of whether and how to proceed. Section 4 of the agreement addresses project development, and as I said, NTIS is the focal point. One of the keys to this relationship and to the joint venture authority, as Avi mentioned, is the ability, if you will, to front load the process of making the determination of what the problem is in order to come up with a good path towards a solution, and to enjoy the flexibility to make adjustments on the fly. These are not the kinds of approaches that are typical of most procurement processes. So that relationship and the ability to do that front-end loading is an important part of NTIS's role in exercising its joint venture authority and in working with you as joint venture partners. So we do point out in the third bullet down here and in the agreement that we are very, very aware of the importance of avoiding joint venture-based projects which could be done pursuant to normal procurement authorities, including the federal acquisition regulations. And we will be stringent in avoiding that, and that will be NTIS's decision to make in order to put us in a position to properly use this unique joint venture authority going forward, and not take the risk that we will be accused of misusing our authority in order to avoid the normal procurement processes when those are appropriate. And you heard Sham spend a good deal of time talking about the types of products or services that you might have that would avail themselves of a normal contracting process. Those should not be the kinds of things that we're dealing with here with the joint venture authority. We're looking to innovate. We're looking for the kinds of services and products to solve problems which do not lend themselves to normal procurements. So we, for example, will not be addressing any projects that federal agencies have made a determination to place in Fed BizOps as a procurement opportunity, because that will be a reflection of a decision that's already been made by that federal agency about how they want to acquire their product or service for their particular need. Project pricing is something that is outlined. It's very important, obviously, and again, one of the keys of the joint venture authority is that it gives NTIS and the joint venture partners the ability and flexibility to develop pricing schemes for a particular project, which are flexible enough to allow the innovation that we believe will be absolutely critical to the success of this program going forward. And so the approach to project pricing is laid out in Section 4 of the agreement there. NTIS will be engaging with the joint venture partners once a decision has been made to go forward with a particular project and the pricing is discussed. NTIS will take that to the federal agency. And it is important, and we pointed out here that, again, the joint venture partners don't deviate from that process. So we expect that NTIS will fill that role of interacting with the federal agency with respect to the pricing determinations that have been jointly made by NTIS and the joint venture partner. And NTIS will be the entity which has the relationship, the direct contractual relationship with the federal agency through what's called an interagency agreement. That is the vehicle that federal agencies use to exchange products and services. NTIS will have that direct relationship with the client agency. Your relationship will be directly with NTIS. And so that is the theme and the principle going forward. It's reflected in the comments throughout this agreement, and that will be something that we, again, will look at to maintain with a great deal of stringency. With respect to letter agreements and billing, the letter agreement is the second part of this relationship. The first is the joint venture agreement itself, which is what we have sent to you as a template and what we're talking about this morning. As we proceed, once that joint venture agreement is signed, and NTIS and joint venture partners, including your organizations, enter into particular projects to solve given federal client agency problems, then with respect to that particular agency problem, there will be a letter agreement that addresses the specifics of a particular engagement, if you will. And so we have these two separate things going on. And Section 4.3 of the joint venture agreement addresses the nature of some of the things that will themselves be reflected in our letter agreements that we will enter into. We're calling them letter agreements for particular joint venture projects under the joint venture authority. And so I bulleted some of them out here. They are in the agreement itself, and I don't know if it's necessary to belabor any of those, but they address all of the important points that we expect may be the subject of variation, if you will, from project to project. So with respect to a particular client agency's problems, they may require something with respect to intellectual property that differs from what the next client agency may require for theirs. So we expect those things to be addressed in each letter agreement, and they may vary from letter agreement to letter agreement. Here's another reflection of the relationship that we're establishing here, which is the question of outreach. I would use the word education. I always like to use that word in the federal context. Educating federal agencies about the opportunities that exist through the joint venture authority to help to solve their very difficult data use problems. NIST, or NTIS, I apologize, will conduct active outreach program. That is one of the things and one of the roles that NTIS is taking on, and that's recited in our agreement. And the joint venture partners will provide reasonable support to encourage federal agencies to use the services of joint ventures as described in the agreement. We expect that costs will be borne by each of the parties themselves, so we're not underwriting anything. We're not asking you to underwrite anything except your own efforts to help to educate the federal agency community about the opportunities. And so in red I have here, NTIS shall propose and the joint venture partner may participate in a broad non-project specific outreach program. The reason we're using that term, again, is that I would use the word education. We want to educate agencies about what we can offer through the joint venture authority and through joint venture projects, but we are not asking and we do not expect individual joint venture partners to go to an agency for directly with a specific project. And that does not fall within the scope of outreach as we're using it in this agreement or as we will expect it to be exercised as our relationship proceeds. This comment here in red reflects something I said, and I think in the first or second slide. So it will be NTIS that will have the relationship with the federal agencies, the potential client agencies. It will be that relationship that NTIS will manage, and we will expect that the joint venture partners will respect that. And if they don't, then there will be problems. And that's in the last bullet there, that we don't expect that you will engage in direct project-specific marketing to any federal agency. That is the kind of thing that NTIS will be doing. So it's a very important aspect to this because Sham did spend some time with respect to legacy, and it's very important that going forward we don't have some of the problems that we found historically where joint venture partners of NTIS were going directly to federal agencies and that caused all sorts of problems. I see that our Deputy Secretary has arrived, and so, oh, well, I've gotten a reprieve here. Have I gotten a reprieve? No, my reprieve's been taken from me.
Yeah. We'll come back. We'll come back. All right, thank you.
I'll be right back.
I'll be right back. All right, so we're really pleased to have someone special here. This individual, I've worked with him kind of for about 6 years back in another position at Census. As you know, data is really a key pillar of the whole commerce mission and strategy. There isn't another individual who has really done more to really fortify that capability and really focus and galvanize commerce in moving in this direction. And the Secretary, Penny Pritzker, and Bruce have been so supportive of this whole effort. We're absolutely honored to have the Honorable Deputy Secretary of Commerce, Bruce Andrews, spend just a few minutes with us here from his busy schedule to give you his perspective. I've heard him before in many of these type of conferences. I just love the energy and the passion that he has for this. Bruce, come on up. Thank you.
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone, and sorry to interrupt on Section 11 confidentiality, but we'll get back to it, which is good. So good morning, and first I just want to thank Avi for that kind introduction and for all of the great work that you've done to make today possible. I'm thrilled to be here at the first meeting of the National Technical Information Services Joint Venture Partners. I also want to recognize, in addition to Avi, Greg Capella and Shyam Sunder and the entire NTIS team. Your hard work throughout the joint venture partner selection process is what really brings us together this morning. Finally, I want to thank all of you, the 35 newly selected joint venture partner organizations. Your work will help unleash the power of federal data for the benefit of all Americans. We deeply appreciate your commitment to this partnership. As we all know, our economy has been transformed by the internet and by the digital technologies that make it possible to share, analyze, and synthesize data like never before. For businesses, government, and institutions of all kinds, data offers an incredible opportunity to discover market trends, to create innovative applications, and to make our government more efficient and our economy more innovative. That is why the Obama administration made open data a priority from day one. Shortly after his inauguration, President Obama launched the Open Government Initiative, ordering all federal agencies to make data as accessible as possible. To achieve this, at the Department of Commerce, we made data one of the 4 pillars of our strategic plan for the very first time. From NOAA to the Census Bureau to the International Trade Administration and throughout our other bureaus, every day the Department of Commerce collects, processes, and disseminates enough data to fill the Library of Congress twice. We really are America's data agency. Our data sets are a rich source of intelligence on demographics, economic growth, trade, the environment, and so much more. Yet, as Secretary Pritzker has said, data has little value if it is not accessible and usable by the public. Our mission at the Department of Commerce is pretty straightforward. We create the opportunities for entrepreneurs, businesses, and communities to succeed in today's global economy. And we can help create more of those opportunities by making our vast troves of data open to business, investors, academics, and all Americans. Under Secretary Pritzker's leadership and with the expertise of our incredible commerce team, we have launched our own internal technology incubator, the Commerce Data Service, developed the Commerce Data Academy, which trains our staff on cutting-edge data tools, and created the Department of Commerce Usability Project to help the public navigate our far-reaching data sets. As a result of these efforts, we've already launched innovative data partnerships. For example, we invited developers to participate in a Hack the Pay Gap challenge using Census Bureau figures and other data sets to combat gender disparities in our economy. Another great example is Mapbox, an online mapping platform using NOAA's rainfall data to help improve forecasting. The possibilities are virtually limitless. Data can help agencies be better stewards of taxpayer dollars. It can help investors seize on new market trends. It can help policymakers diagnose problems and craft better solutions. Yet we're only at the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the power of big data. That's why it is critical that we create reliable standards, compatible formats, and better infrastructure. We need data scientists, developers, technical experts, and academics to improve compatibility, pursue consensus, and change the culture towards data both inside and outside the federal government. That is where you and your organizations come in. And NTIS is the perfect place to house this partnership. NTIS has a unique mission to collect and disseminate the federal government's highly scientific, technical, and business-related information. But of course, governments cannot answer every question. That's why public-private partnerships are essential. We agree that data-driven decision-making can reduce red tape and enhance efficiency in government, that there is an enormous commercial potential in better collecting, analyzing, and delivering data to the public and private sectors, and that we must do a better job structuring and standardizing data so that it is usable across an array of applications and sectors. The Joint Ventures Initiative has the potential to make a real difference. You can help to develop new tools that lead to greater insights from our data, discover new applications for federal data in the private sector, from cloud computing to predictive analytics to land use planning, and improve the integration of data from across the government into more accessible online data warehouses. Simply put, the JV partnerships represent an opportunity for the federal government to accelerate innovation in data access, discovery, and usability. You are industry innovators. You are at the forefront of the digital economy, and you are chosen for this partnership because you have the expertise and the talent. So we need your help. We need to hear from you about how agencies can better leverage our vast data sets. What are we doing well? What can we do better? Today is only the beginning of what we know will be an indispensable partnership. Together, we can push the boundaries of what's possible. Together, we can make our data more accessible and usable to businesses, entrepreneurs, and consumers across America. Together, we can create 21st century solutions that expand access to data and spur innovation, opportunity, and prosperity nationwide. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to having a successful day, and back to confidentiality.
All right. Well, that's excellent. I know that you want to jump right back into Section 11.327A after that, but it does reflect the support that this effort and that you are central to has throughout this department at the very highest levels. And one thing I can say that with the change in administrations that's imminent, data are not going to go away. Data is going to get bigger and bigger, and our challenges will continue. So we feel very comfortable that the types of solutions that we're offering through the Joint Venture Authority working with you all will be very, very important going forward for many, many years. So, getting back to the very interesting confidentiality provisions of the agreement, the key here is do not give us any secret sauce that you don't have to. We don't want it. NTIS doesn't want it. The federal agencies don't want it. The incredible, innovative things that you are doing in order to solve the problems that are your secret sauce, keep them to yourselves. Don't tell us about them unless it's absolutely necessary in order for NTIS to fulfill its role or for the federal agency to take advantage of the product or the service that is developed. With that said, you are dealing with federal agencies, and federal agencies are subject to a number of obligations to make information available to the public, primarily the Freedom of Information Act, and that is true here, and we are subject to the Freedom of Information Act. Another aspect with respect to the work that you'll be doing is that you'll be working with data sets, and the data sets themselves may be sensitive, may be subject to law or regulation or both, or to agreements. And those kinds of aspects with respect to obligations of confidentiality and your ability to use the data sets themselves will be reflected in each individual letter agreement. To the extent that NTIS is subject to a request for information, for example, under FOIA, we obligate ourselves under this agreement to make you aware of that and give you an opportunity to do whatever is available to you under the Freedom of Information Act. So, for example, there are some data that you've shared with us or information which is confidential. You can take advantage of the processes that exist under the FOIA, and under the Commerce Department's implementation of it to protect that data as well. But ultimately, as it says in the final bullet at the bottom of this slide, the final decision as to whether or not to withhold information will be made by NTIS. One of the things that we do obligate ourselves and you is that we will, neither of us will disclose to third parties any business leads learned about pursuant to the agreement without the other party's written consent, except as otherwise may be required by federal law. And then we have the typical disclaimer of NTIS's obligations with respect to things that were already known to it and the like, which you, I'm sure, all see in your day-to-day confidentiality agreements. And NTIS obligates itself not to spread any of the secret sauce that you do give us beyond those employees of NTIS who absolutely need to have it and are aware of it and of their obligation to maintain it confidential. So here, this is the same theme again. If NTIS is obligated pursuant to a law or legal proceeding to disclose, then NTIS will have to do that. We'll give you an opportunity to interject yourself into that process if it were to come about. One of the things that we say in the bottom bullet, and we're going to say it again here in another slide, is that we expect with respect to obligations under this agreement generally, but including the confidentiality agreement, that any agreements that you may have with third parties, your own contractors or other joint venture collaborators, that these agreement provisions will flow down and that you will flow them down in any agreements that you enter into with others. We do have a slide here making the point or emphasizing the point about the joint venture relationship and the fact that it is not a contract and that you are not a contractor and that the FAR is not applicable to this joint venture partnership agreement. And then, as I said, I said we have the number of flow down provisions. We expect that these provisions of the agreement will flow down, and these are some of the highlights of those. And so flow down should not be of any surprise to anybody here. Intellectual property rights. The key here is that with respect to the ability of the federal client agency to use whatever it is that you innovate and come up with to solve their problems, we expect them to have the right to do that, to use it. This is a joint venture agreement. It's not a grant, it's not a contract, it's not a cooperative agreement. The Bayh-Dole Act does not apply to it. That said, we expect that in individual letter agreements, as we go forward with individual client agencies, that their needs for use with respect to any intellectual property developed in the course of a joint venture will be reflected in an individual letter agreement. So to the extent that we're working with a federal agency that wants more than just the right to use the deliverables, which is going to be the minimum right that we're going to expect, then that will be a topic of negotiation on a one-off basis. But the default mode will be that we are not expecting that you are going to be giving us any more than that right to use the deliverables. We are not going to be taking what would be the equivalent of Bayh-Dole rights in intellectual property that you come up with in the course of the work. I'll just mention that the flip side of that, which is to the extent that any NTIS employees or federal agency and client agency employees were to come up with something patentable in the course of this exercise under the joint venture agreement and the particular letter agreement, then the Stevenson-Weidler Act, which governs rights to inventions made by federal employees, would apply, and that would just have to be dealt with. But I think the way that the joint venture authority is structured, and based on the way it has worked in the past, that's rather unlikely, but you should simply be aware that that would be the case to the extent that there was a joint invention that involved federal employees. Stevenson-Weidler would apply. And as I already made the point about the data may be sensitive, and so that will also be addressed in letter agreement. So this is what I've already mentioned, that the minimum that we would like. The term we are anticipating for these agreements is 3 years, and that we will start looking at them after 2 years are up and considering whether what our next steps will be. And that could be simply renewing them. It could be going back with another announcement. One of the keys here and one of the reasons that you're in this room is because you are some of the leading innovators in the field in data science, and we want to maintain our leading edge approach to this, and so that's going to require that NTIS on a periodic basis go back and look for joint venture partners to help it solve the problems that will continue to evolve and emerge over time. And so that all of those things considered together were the reason that we ended up with a 3-year term for this agreement. The only indemnifications we're asking for in this agreement are indemnifications against infringement claims by third parties for the use of whatever products or services are come up with. So that's pretty straightforward. And that is basically all I have for you. We'll be happy to answer any questions after the end, but I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much for coming today. It's good to be the last presenter prior to the break. It always moves things along. Just a refresher, we do have a number of features of the joint venture agreements that are particularly add value in our minds. And part of it is, of course, that merit-based process which we walked through earlier, as well as the ability to collaborate and innovate with our federal agencies. Finally, be able to frame the actual problem set with that federal customer, we feel is a very big value add. And I won't belabor this chart as has already been touched on twice, but I would like to point out that right above the chevrons, the 60 to 90 days, that's our target. We're going to work hard to try to make this a fast process. We also feel that's a value add for our joint venture agreements, and we hope to make that a reasonable goal for us all. Part of it, of course, deals with our relationship as well as the relationship with the federal agency, and of course, our agreements. So the letter agreement that'll come forward, but I'll talk to that in just a moment. In terms of the actual process, I'm going to walk through it step by step at a fairly high level, and we'll have a chance after the break to come back and ask questions. The sponsoring or funding agency, the federal agency, will identify a problem. We, NTIS, will meet with them and discuss that problem set. We'll create a small paper, probably 2, 3, at most probably 5 pages, kind of highlighting what our initial impressions are of that particular problem set. And the next step is we'll take and send that out to the various joint venture partners and ask if they're interested. Clearly, you represent different skill sets, different interests, so it'll be a self-selection process. Those that wish to can join us with that federal agency to go and discuss that problem set further, drill in deeper, understand what you can bring to the table, and also what the better refine that problem. For those of you who've dealt quite a bit with the federal government, we often try hard to define that problem, but it's extremely difficult with the quick pace of modern technology that evolves so quickly to really nail down exactly what our needs are, and then best how to position that for success. With your help and ours, we hope to refine that problem statement. And then we, NTIS, will take the synthesis of that particular set of meetings and create a new problem statement. That new problem statement will be then sent out to all the partners to see if they'll propose. If the proposals come in, we'll go ahead and evaluate them in that merit-based process. We'll do a selection of a partner or partners, and that's another unique feature of our joint venture agreements. We can ask that parts of various proposals be melded together to create a more coherent, more effective solution. And that is something we'd work directly with the various partners. Then, once we present this, we basically aggregate your proposals, so selectees' proposals, their information into our proposal back to the federal agency. That is the NTIS proposal. I have to keep emphasizing it is an NTIS relationship with that federal agency. We'll get their agreement, and the interagency agreement actually gets consummated on a Treasury Form 7600 A and B in case you wanted to get that in a trivia contest tonight. But that's the form we use. Then we will actually get to the part where rubber meets the road. Once the customer has actually signed the agreements, agreeing to the terms and conditions, we will in turn send you that letter agreement that Henry mentioned a little bit earlier. With that letter agreement, we'll specify those unique terms and conditions, the revenue shares, among others. And then, once we finish our negotiations, and remember I said 60 to 90 days, and for those of you who've lived through some of those negotiations in the past, we're hopeful for a very cooperative and positive relationship as we talk through those agreements and go through it quickly, because obviously that's a big step in our process. And upon completion and execution of that agreement, we'll start our work. 60 to 90 days is our target. Okay? Now, with that said, Avi will take you through.
As you can see, I think this has been flowing pretty good because we've been working very closely together on all of this. So I just want to go about a couple of things before we go into break. First, a lot of that would not happen with some really dedicated internal staff that we have at NTIS. And not everyone is here, but some of them are here. So I would just like for them to stand up, and wanted to thank them for a lot of their support to get to this point. So NTIS folks, stand up. All right. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate that. This is a new model that we're pursuing here, and the success will really depend on how actively we interact with each other. I don't want to get into a situation where basically, essentially, we leave the meetings and you're sitting there back in your offices saying, okay, that was a nice meeting. It's now 2 months have gone by. I have not heard anything. We will have to figure out together how we do a much better job of engaging. I look forward to your input in terms of how we do that. It could be quarterly conferences. It could be webcasts, data calls. We need to have active engagement and conversation and discussions about the topics in industry, and we will definitely invite federal agencies to present topics and issues. So any thoughts that you have, I value that, and send this to us. The key thing about this operating model is it will have to scale over time. We've already heard from some organizations that have said, I didn't know about this. How do I play with this? How do I participate in this? We're going to have to figure out that beyond the 3 years of engagement, how we potentially introduce a new organization directly or through the partnerships that you have. That's all really pretty critical. I listened to the flow of information. I hope it's been useful so far. So now let's take a 20-minute break. Think about what you've heard. I know you have lots of questions. And then the next session will really be this interactive approach where we basically hear from you. So why don't we just say that we'll see you back here at like 11:15, 11:20? Thanks. let's get settled. I think we're ready for the next phase. We'll now begin the Q&A session. So this has been an action-packed morning, lots of information we threw at you. If you remember at the beginning, I mentioned that, I know why you're here. You really need to net out the what, how do we get engaged, when do we begin to work together with customers, this JVP agreement, the legal agreement, what is that going to take? When can we get started? Well, I think as Henry mentioned, as soon as we have the agreement in place, we'll begin to do lots of things in terms of working with federal agencies. So you've heard things about the process, the timing, the JVP agreement, a little bit about the guardrails that we have from the Oversight Board that Sham had mentioned. Greg took you through the process. And hopefully kind of sticking to a 60, 90-day approach, which I think will be quite innovative. I mentioned that ideally I'd like to get started working with you really no later than the end of January, if at all possible, if we have the agreements in place. Okay, so now we have some time to go through Q&As. I'm going to go sit back there now, and I think there are mics on both sides. And I really encourage you to just ask us questions. And if you have no questions, we'll just have the JVP agreement ready for your signature as you walk out. And we'll get started in about 2 weeks, actually.
I do have a question. My name is Al Slater. About these quarterly meetings, I don't think they're enough to engage. I think if we can have bi-weekly, that would be great. Oh, sorry, I had 60 minutes on. Sorry about that. In a way that we can get bi-weekly meetings through some type of open, maybe forum, similar to WebEx or maybe some kind of Google collaboration, but way that we can put a forum on and collect the information and generate ideas. And there's commercial products that allow you to do that, exchange information. More importantly is that we have to have a consistent way of meeting and be able to generate ideas in a dynamic way, and especially around the problem, ability to break down a problem into parts where you can identify certain skill sets to relate to the problem. Because, we have to identify the skills and the problems and bring the right people to solve that. So that's basically my statement and a question.
Okay, I think we're going to take notes. I agree with you that we need to have a continuous cadence of engagement, whether it's bi-weekly, monthly, I don't know yet, whether we use a WebEx, whether we extend our existing website and maybe enable it with more of a kind of a crowdsourcing capability. These are all the things that we're thinking about. In terms of matching the skill sets, I agree with you. One possibility over time is to expand our website to include actual profiles of individuals within your organization with links back to your company. These are all the things that we're thinking about so that we give you the right exposure. So it's noted, and let us give it some thought. Yes.
This is Carol Schutte. I work at NTIS. I was asked 2 questions, and I'll relay them to you. One is, will the slides be available? The second was, are electronic signatures acceptable for signing the JV agreement?
The slides will be available, And on that other point?
Electronic signatures will be acceptable. We are working our way into the late 20th century right now with respect to our ability to do that.
Hi, question. Could you go through the syntax of how opportunities germinate from the idea? I think what I heard was that people self-select, you present an idea to the whole group, people self-select if it's sort of in their roundhouse, and then there's a sort of maybe a scope developed, and then you go out to the group again for the proposals, or to the group who originally helped develop? I'm trying to get a feel for that whole process.
Just slight tuning of that. First is that the first interaction with the federal agency to create the initial, if you will, kind of a, for lack of a better term, and I'm going to use a FAR language, and I apologize, Henry's going to kick me on the table, but it's kind of a scoping statement, if you will, that occurs between NTIS and the federal agency. With that, we go out to you and basically see who's interested. Then we meet with the customer, with whoever's interested, to walk through what they're thinking, talk about what you can bring to the table, how we might be able to better address the problem, how to look at the problem in different ways. That gets coalesced down to a document that NTIS creates with the customer, and then we send it out for proposal. Did I answer your question?
Almost.
Yeah,
So do you send it out to the people who originally responded with the interest and present it to the customer, or does it go back out to everybody in the group?
Just to clarify, the ideation process, the problem definition is something that the classic way it gets done is where NTIS and a federal agency identify a problem. The JV partner is not identifying the problem, right? So they have an initial problem statement. So NTIS may be talking to Economics and Statistics Administration, and they decide that in the area of economic statistics and how we improve GDP estimates might be a problem. Once there's an interest between those two, that initial problem statement, short problem statement, is put out to the 35 companies or organizations, and those who are interested come to an information session with the agency, with NTIS, and whoever in the partners are interested. There's a discussion so that the agency can discuss with the partners, with NTIS, and then and the partners can get a better idea of what the problem is. After that session is over, the partners will be in a position to decide whether they would like to send a proposal in. The agency would go back and finalize the problem statement based on the engagement with the partners, so they've got some ideas to improve it, and then they put out the final problem statement. So that is the linear, classic way we'd like to see this work. Now, I did point out this morning, you guys have a lot of interesting thoughts about problems that NTIS could be working on. And how do we draw on that knowledge and that creative set of ideas? That's still the process for that has not been finalized yet. So we are, at this point, kind of grappling with that, and I think we can use this morning to get ideas on how to go about doing that. But among the ideas are, if you have an idea, remember always that any idea you share with NTIS, eventually it will be put to all 35 partners to be able to contribute to and submit a proposal, and that NTIS will need to get funding from an agency that's interested in that problem. So I just want you to be aware of that.
Thank you.
Good morning. Alex Musavi, Dell EMC. So the way the JVP is currently structured, it seems like most of the opportunities or the problem statement discussions are going to be generated, or the incentive is for them to be generated by NTIS first. So for instance, if, me as a private company, we go out, we create a dialogue with a federal customer, we find an opportunity, what incentive do we have to bring it to the JVP? Because in essence, our customer intimacy now can be, disseminated amongst 35 other organizations.
That's a great question, and I think it relates to the other question that maybe we didn't really focus. So, yeah, and I've been in private industry and very possessive of my relationship with an existing client. Why would I want to share that with somebody else? That's the bottom line. The relationship that we have is between NTIS and the federal agency. The federal agency, when they're trying to solve a specific data-driven problem, as I mentioned before, has a number of instruments that they can use. And the examples would be an existing contract that they may have in place with you. They could go out and do a codathon and hackathon. They may use a grant. Lots of different instruments. Now, but you have the relationship with this particular client, and this federal agency has a problem. It is really up to the federal agencies in its relationship with NTIS to fully understand and comprehend all the tools that they have at their disposal. If at the end they believe that the relation that they have with you and the existing contract that you may have with you is really the best approach for them to solve this, frankly, that's really beyond their control. I think what the federal agencies will be seeing very shortly is that their actual intent is in fact to solve the business problem and to achieve a certain outcome. And for them, the time to market is also important here. And the ability to access a host of capabilities and innovation through partnerships. You could also partner with someone. That's just a decision that frankly they will have to make. And that is part of the reality. We think there's a great incentive actually of exposing the opportunity to a broader audience, because at the end of the day, if in fact you have the unique skill sets and through teaming arrangements, you would probably have a good opportunity. But that's just the way it works. It's a merit-based approach, and that's a consideration that you need to make.
Good morning. I'm Heidi Bernardo from Cherokee Nation. My question is, do you already have agencies that are engaged in this JV, or what agencies are you targeting? Are they more on the defense side or civilian side?
Under the existing JVP agreement, we already engage with lots of different agencies. Many of them happen to be in the Department of Defense. Some of them even within the Department of Commerce, Health and Human Services, CIS, other organizations. But many of them are on businesses that we are now transitioning away from because they're not aligned with data mission. Some of them are aligned and some of them are not. So we do have extensive number of customers in place today, and working with a host of federal agencies, not just even the Department of Commerce.
Hi, Mary Beth Wooten with Barico Technologies. I have a question about the individual customers based on your experience with the past JVPs. Do you tend to work with people in partnership with their own procurement organization, or are you authorized to work directly with the director of analysis technology or some kind of programmatic decision maker within the agency without the authority of their own procurement shop and a contracting officer on the other end?
This is a fantastic question, and I'll take a shot and I'll be corrected. The way this operating model is supposed to work, we basically work with you, the JVPs, to essentially, I have to be careful about the words that I use, sell, but let's just call it program development. We work with you to sell at the CXO level. We sell at the CFO, the CEO, at that level of the organization, because that's where our value proposition is very compelling. Once a decision is made that, okay, so how do we work with you? At that point in time, we have to execute an interagency agreement. There's a form called a 7600. A blanket 7600 provides us with the permission to work with this agency. The specific task order, when the funding will be transferred, is called a 7600B. This is the point in time where we may have sold at the CXO level, but when it comes to the actual execution of the paperwork, and the team that is from NTIS here today, we have some expertise in then working through the contracting shops to streamline that paperwork process.
Let me add a little bit more color to what Avi said. At NTIS, the Joint Venture Authority is the stewardship for the Joint Venture Authority is provided by the Chief Counsel's office, not by the acquisitions shop at NIST. So that's the first and foremost, is it's a legal agreement, both in terms of an interagency agreement between NTIS and the federal agency, and the joint venture partnership agreement and the letter agreement with the JV partners. All of that is done through the Office of the Chief Counsel and the team that is sitting in the room. At the agency level, NTIS leadership and its program managers will engage with program people at the agency level, the people with the need to solve a problem, right? That's the group with whom they will define a problem, and then they put it out. Now, it's up to the agency to decide if the value proposition provided by NTIS is what they want to use, or they want to use some other instrument. It's up to the agency. But if they choose to work with NTIS, then they have this approach available to them, which is a very unique way of working with the private sector.
And I would just add another point to the other gentleman that spoke before, because about, who controls the account and so forth. I know, at least from my experience in selling on the private sector, and frankly, I avoided the federal government because it was too cumbersome, so I just focused on commercial. But the thing that you don't want to do is to get into very long, protracted sales cycles when you have all these meetings and you leave the meeting and you say, did we just talk to the right person? Are we wasting our time? Well, that's really part of the value proposition of NTIS, because we are very much focused programmatically. If there's a mission, if there's a data requirement, we are the ones that are going to work with these federal agencies to let them know, in fact, how they can do business with us and our JVPs.
Hi, I'm John Teeter from People Power, Malka, and Urban Systems. I have a very simple question. The bottom line is, are you going to publish an attendee list for those that came? And kind of the reason I ask that is, first, it's a great honor to be here, but I think it's also an opportunity, a very distinct opportunity, to find commonalities of interest and to leverage skill sets across the joint venture partners. So I guess the question is, beyond just the attendee list, do you anticipate that when responses are made for the merit reviews, that it will be individuals or collections of partners that are bringing their skill sets together to respond?
It's basically all of the above. Ideally, we would like, so you'll have the names of attendees, you'll have the slides, and we really hope that the partners here will get to know each other. Many of the organizations here already submitted capability statements that included a number of partners that they plan to team with. We would like to encourage collaboration, co-opetition. I think that's really critical. During a typical opportunity, when we go to a certain agency, once we have the problem statement, the statement has been issued, and now all 35 are eligible to basically compete in this, we would hope that, in fact, you would consider teaming on some of these opportunities. And NTIS, given our role in supporting the federal agency, when we look at some of these proposals that may come in, we in fact may find 2 or 3 organizations that all have done a great job in providing a solution. And maybe we can structure a deal in such a way that those 3 organizations can actually work together to deliver on the solution. So I think all of that is possible.
Hi, Chris Corey with Dun & Bradstreet, and I have 2 questions. The first one I may have just been confused on, but in looking at when the slide where you talked about the problem statement being released to the partners, I thought it said that it was posted in the Federal Register, and I'm just wondering if you can talk, okay, yeah, so it's going to just go to the 35 partners. Perfect. That's the one I was confused on. The second one, and I think, Avi, you sort of alluded to this just now, but I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the merit-based process, and in particular, I'm wondering, when you get proposals in from some subset of the JVPs, is NTIS then evaluating those in a vacuum, almost like a prime might, and then presenting them to the government agency, or are you collaborating with the government agency to evaluate whatever comes in?
I'm actually going to have Sham address, this is one of his area of specialties, but the only thing I will set up front is that the sponsoring agency who will be funding this effort at some point in the process will clearly have a voice.
So, some of the answer that I'm going to give you is, what we're doing in the last 2 years is fixing old problems. So I will be now give you an example of a problem that we are trying to fix. One of the partners, a partner, goes to the agency. They build a great relationship with this agency. Many of you do this all the time. Oh, the agency likes you, you want to do this work for them, and they're saying, oh, it's going to take 9 months before I can get it through this acquisition thing or whatever the thing they're talking about, right? So then you guys come up and somebody says, but you know there's this agency called NTIS? You can move the money through them in 60 to 90 days. So money goes back directly to that partner in a loop. And what has NTIS done? It's misused the public trust and in fact has enabled that federal agency to circumvent the FAR. And this is I'm just giving you an example of the problem we are trying to fix. That cannot go on, right? So yes, you have the merit process that we're going to have is one in which the federal agency helps NTIS define the problem statement. The joint venture authority belongs to NTIS, not to the federal agency. So NTIS as an agency is responsible for the stewardship of that authority and has full accountability to Congress and to the administration. So they need to put in place a review process. So likely what's going to happen is there will be 3 independent reviewers of every proposal, one of whom may be a staff member from that agency, 2 of whom will be independent of that agency, and then there will be an NTIS selecting official with some consultation within NTIS to make a decision based on those reviews. So the agency will not be deciding who is actually the winner. What NTIS has is the input from that agency through the review process. But again, but ultimately remember, the customer is the agency, but NTIS owns the authority, and it needs to make sure the authority is properly used. If those 2 can be met, I think we're in good shape.
Can I ask one quick follow-up to that then? Does the agency commit to going forward with the venture prior to going forward? I mean, if they don't like the NTIS outcome, is that they could still pull back the funding? How does that work?
In theory, so you usually would not go through what I'm going to call a competition, but it's really a merit-based process. We wouldn't do this if we didn't have a strong sense that the agency wanted to work with NTIS. Now, you do realize until the agency signs the interagency agreement, they can withdraw. And of course, you can always cancel an interagency agreement too. I'm sure our lawyers will tell you that. So, but for most planning purposes, yes. I mean, if you're doing the competition, you wouldn't be doing it without some sense it's going to work.
I would just add that many of the agencies, and there were some people in the audience that had left, that we had invited some agencies here. The biggest issue that they see is, how can we get started? When will the agreements be in place, and how can we get started?
Brendan Walsh with 1901 Group. Is there a backlog? Are there interested parties and problems to be solved today? And if so, can you share any of that with us?
There is, I don't have something documented, but let me just say that with the conversation that I've had with statistical agencies, there is a backlog of problems that they're trying to address. They span everything from dealing with mashing up data sets and dealing with interoperabilities from Social Security, the IRS, the Census Bureau, a whole bunch of other agencies to do some analytics. There is a backlog on having the secure underlying infrastructure to deal with this title data. There are a host of organizations with civilian agencies who are looking to work with us. In terms of where these opportunities are coming from, how do we know about them? We work very closely with OSTP and the data cabinet that's been set up. The data cabinets from OSTP, I don't know if they were here before to listen to this. They work with chief data officers from every single agency. They are, in fact, in business terms, a distribution channel for a lot of these opportunities. So there really is a backlog. There is a tremendous thirst for having this front-loading conversation, discussion.
Vishal Kapoor with Deloitte. Thank you. I think it's been a fabulous conference, seminar so far. My question is related to the branding of this JV. So essentially, you mentioned every agency has multiple choices on how they, procure services of this nature, right? They're government-wide acquisition vehicles, they're agency-specific contracts, and then there's this opportunity. And agencies are likely to use this most effectively if this offers them better value, more streamlined, faster turnaround times. So my question is, what, if anything, are you doing at the moment or maybe in the near-term plans in terms of branding, communication, kind of spreading the word out as to what the value this JV can provide to them, if you can share that perspective?
Right now, on the marketing and branding side, we are challenged. We have been so focused on transitioning to this new business model, putting in place the legal structure, identifying the partners, that we really have not paid too much attention to the branding. We have a new updated website. I think it's just a very small step, but I think this is something that we really need to work on to get out the message. Even today, for example, a meeting like this, under normal circumstances, you would be seeing lots of tweets, lots of impressions out there. I would gather that there probably isn't anything going on out there right now. So I hear what you're saying. That is a key area. We're going to be looking at both internal communications and leveraging external media, external communications. It's a high priority for me in the coming next 3 months.
Can I just add to a couple things? The value proposition, if we do the branding right, and I'm confident that NTIS and under Avi's leadership has this as an important thing that they're going to work on. The problem is, the issue is managing expectations. And I will tell you that there are a number of people in the government that have been, as Avi said, wanting to figure out when they can get started, like you guys too. So at this point, the thing that is going to help, is going to accelerate the getting started piece is the agreements being finalized and signed. But the one thing I do want to point out to you is 95% of the NTIS revenue in 2016 was using the joint venture authority, 95%. And, or at least the services component, a large fraction of which was the JV authority. Its budget in 2009 was $30 million. In 2013 was $75 million. And in 2016, the CFO is here, I think it was 190 or roughly $190 million. People know the value of the JV authority to get stuff done quickly. I just want you to know that. That is the intrinsic value proposition, okay? So leave aside that, but we're not selling it only on that. We're now putting in place the programmatic reason to use the JV authority and the merit process that we will use to execute. So just keep that in mind.
Hi, Kirtan Upadhyay from Bays Impact. I had a quick question on the problem process cycle that runs every 60, 90 days. What is the capacity of NTIS to do multiple problem statements or multiple agency works in parallel? I ask because as JVPs, will we have opportunities presented to us every 30 or 60 days, or will there be multiple opportunities happening in parallel for us to partake in?
The intent is not to do this in a serial process. It is to have multiple opportunities taking place. The way we hope to accomplish that, we have an existing team of data scientists within NTIS. We have access to data scientists here at the Commerce Data Service, potentially as well. We will have access to other feds that have the requisite skills. But the point that you bring up is a really critical one, because I don't really think that hiring additional people and having it necessarily a professional services model is a way to really scale this business the way it can be scaled. So that then speaks to what type of an operating model are we going to have in place to really build this, I hate to use the cliches, but to build the ecosystem of partners that the consumers and producers of our services. And should that be multiple different models we could look at? Maybe over time we expand our existing website and our brand to be more of a crowdsourcing capability. We really need to think about scaling our business. We have recruited the services of a global organization to help us come up with a better approach on the business model. And scaling it is something of real concern because there is tremendous pent-up demand.
Yeah, I think in general, NTIS, its existing model is multiple parallel projects. So I think that they have roughly between 120 and 130 projects right now. I think what Avi and Greg would love to do, and because they have mentioned this several times, is maybe have fewer projects but larger dollar volume projects. So that is still an evolution in progress, but that's sort of where they're trying to aspire to. So that's one piece of it. The other thing you have to keep in mind is very often the federal government works on a budget year process, a fiscal year process. Oftentimes money does become more freely available toward the end of the fiscal year. First quarter this year, you can be sure people don't have the money because of the appropriation is not even passed for FY17. So to presume that there will be projects all the way through the fiscal year is probably, maybe you'll find more opportunities show up during the second half of the year than the first half of the year, although the team will continue to be working the development of ideas and refinement of ideas and even run competitions maybe at different times in the year, but the monies themselves will probably become available toward the second half, last quarter of the year.
I have two questions just to clarify what was said earlier. In the original announcement, there were 4 areas that we responded to expressing interest. You've said that once the problem is identified and finalized, it will be released to all 35 partners. Does that mean that we can respond to an area that we initially did not express interest in? And then my second question, which is also fairly simple, You said that the proposal or response would go to NTIS and it will be incorporated into your response and then provided to the federal agency. Is it per vendor, or will all of our responses be incorporated into, okay.
Regardless of the capability skill set that you submitted the proposal for, you'll be able to respond to all problem statements. In fact, that would be encouraged because at that point in time, maybe in the last couple of months, you now have some additional skills and capabilities. Maybe you have some new partners. You would be encouraged to help discuss that and shape the problem statement so that in fact it addresses the mission requirement of this federal agency, and your individual contribution would be very valuable. That would then be considered by NTIS as we work with the federal agency. And at that point in time, through the dialogue and the question that you'll be hearing from other partners, you'll begin to see the emergence of a new framing of the problem set that could then lead to some potential partnerships as well. And at that point in time, everyone is eligible to respond to this opportunity.
A couple of additional thoughts. Of the 35, 26 of you said that you had expertise in all 4 areas. Now, clearly, the level of expertise might vary among those 26 of you, and it does vary, but I would suggest that nothing prevents you, if you said your expertise is in one area, nothing prevents you from teaming up with somebody else of these partners with an expertise in the other areas to submit a proposal. So, in fact, that is what we're trying to encourage, is also cross-collaboration. Especially, there are a large number of the 35, I believe 18 were small or medium firms. There are some behemoths in the group, and there are universities in the group, but a large number were small firms. So I would strongly encourage, this is Sham speaking, not the agency, teaming would be great. Now, you asked about what gets submitted to the agency. So you go through this merit process. NTIS runs this merit process. NTIS makes a selection. And let's assume, for this hypothetical discussion, only one company is going to be the winner, right, for this particular project. If one company is a winner and NTIS decides it's going to do some piece of the work itself, and the partner, this is a partnership between NTIS and the JV partner. Okay? NTIS may do some portion of the work, the partner may do some portion of the work. Those together will be the proposals submitted to the federal agency, right? Now, NTIS doing some portion of the work could include the data scientists that are directly in NTIS, or the partnership with the Commerce Data Service, as Avi mentioned, and other things like that. But it'll be federal folks working with NTIS. If you have a project in which maybe 2 companies, we look at the proposal, NTIS looks at the proposal and decides, well, for some of these areas, this company is really, really good, and some of these other areas, this company is really, really good, and that's what's probably going to optimally meet the agency's needs, then it could be those 2 proposals, and the elements of those proposals together with NTIS's work will be sent to the agency. But remember, that discussion will take place among the partners before the final is submitted. So let's assume they go through this review process and decide company X and university Y are going to be the best team for this particular project. Well, they'll have to talk to those 2 and get them to kind of a meeting of the minds with NTIS to work that out before they submit it to the agency.
Thank you.
I would just add one thing. If I think we can, I'm going to ask a question, maybe just of Greg. What is the range of the types of opportunities that we work with from a financial perspective? What are they, from small to large?
The small probably wouldn't be as germane for this audience, mainly because those are mostly like learning management, excuse me, which we're getting out of. In terms of the project in the data science space, the newer projects, they range on the small side at about $1 million, large size, about 5 million. But that's a relatively small sample size. The demand out there is rather large. So, and this is an evolving, so the engagement itself for the larger projects would be multi-year. So there'd be more focus as we go forward. So a piece this year might be a fundamental building block. Next year, we might look at another area of innovation. The idea is, though, that we would innovate, and when it comes time for contract action to substitute for our work, then the contract action would occur for that piece of work. After we innovate, we get it established, we don't continue. We're not an O&M organization.
So typical is from 1 to 5 million. Is there anything that precludes us if the opportunity just happened to be 10 or 20 million?
Only my blood pressure. No, it's all good.
Hi, sorry, I can't see all of you, but I'm Katie Anderson. I'm with Dun & Bradstreet. I have two questions. The first is probably for Sham, which is, you mentioned the Oversight Board. I'm curious how the partners will experience the role of the Oversight Board once we're working together? Not at all?
The purpose of the Oversight Board is to make sure the guardrails for NTIS are strong and they're implemented and they're executed. So we really look at what NTIS is doing. And the reason I'm here is because I kind of think I run NTIS. No, kidding. But you know, I've been so invested in NTIS for the last couple of years. I know a lot about the stuff. And Greg and Avi have their hands full with the team that is sitting here in trying to evolve the agency. They have the current portfolio. They're building a new portfolio. So we're kind of all sharing the effort here. But the Oversight Board only meets occasionally as a board. I am engaged with NTIS kind of very regularly, but I want to get to a place pretty soon where they have institutionalized everything that is to be done, and then we can be put out of business. So you, as a JV partner, in general, would not be dealing with the Oversight Board. Your primary points of contact are Avi and the entire NTIS team.
And I'll just add just another way of saying this, and it really summarizes our presentation. So we have JV authority by law. We have an interpretation of what that JV authority means and what it allows us to do with respect to the data mission. We then have the Oversight Board that is helping us together with legal to put in place the proper process and internal controls so that once they're in place, we can function freely to get something done. The Oversight Board periodically examines our internal controls and processes to make sure that, in fact, we're following a merit-based process and approach that does not circumvent the FAR. That is really their role. And once that is in place and it's audited and so forth, you know, Greg and I and the JVPs and others will work together to get stuff done.
Second question was around performance measurement. So I'm curious what NTIS's approach will be to ensure the success of the overall program, but also at the opportunity level and the contract level with the federal customer.
Performance measurements and metrics will be key. We do not have any appropriated funds. So like you, if we're unable to generate opportunities, we go out of business. So we have an incentive to work very closely with you and the federal agencies to address their federal data priorities. In terms of specific metrics, some of the metrics are basically self-driven because we need to be financially sound and solvent. That's one set of metrics. The other set of metrics is how quickly will we be able to sign the agreements, how quickly will we be able to engage with federal agencies to identify the opportunities, when can we begin to actually work on these opportunities, and then how do we then re-examine what we have done and scale the business models. So we will have many of these metrics in place.
So if one or more partners participate on an opportunity, do the partners get to see the final proposal product, the NTIS product, the collective solution, or do we only see the part that we participated in?
You see both, because we submit this together.
And it's a partnership, again, remember, this is a complete partnership. You're going to be working together. Yeah.
Hi, Rene Bastone, representing the Big Data Innovation Hubs. So you talked a little bit about intellectual property. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that. My understanding is that it'll be based on individual letter agreements, depending on which agency submits the problem. In addition to that, we have a particular twist on this because all of the Big Data Innovation Hubs are based in universities, and I guess the other university partners also may want to understand a little bit more about the possibility of spin-outs, and if you have examples of successful spin-outs that have already happened.
So with respect to the first part of your question, as I said, and as was reflected in the template agreement, the default mode is that we are going to ask for no more rights in your intellectual property than are necessary to allow the client agency to make use of the deliverable. And so if you do something innovative in the course of satisfying a joint venture partnership letter agreement project, that innovation is yours. That's the presumption. You are basically giving the client agency a license to use it for their purposes, for that agency's purposes. And so that's the default. That's what we're saying should happen most of the time. On a case-by-case basis, as a result of the discussions between NTIS, the joint venture partner, and predominantly the client federal agency, if an agency needs more in the way of rights than what I have just described, that will be dealt with and negotiated on a one-off basis and reflected in the letter agreement. So if an agency wants, let's say, the complete opposite of that, if the agency wants to own any intellectual property that you develop in the course of this joint venture partnership project, that will be reflected in the letter agreement, and it will be made available to all the joint venture partners, and you will make a decision, just as the agency has, you'll make a decision whether it makes sense for you to participate or not in that particular project. But that would be negotiated. But our default will be you keep what you generate. And with respect to, I'll let others talk about the spin-outs, but with respect to your ability to take that intellectual property and use it for spin-outs, it would seem to me to be unfettered given the default scheme that I've just articulated.
And I'll just give you anecdotal information that many statistical agencies are not in the business of building apps. They're not in the business of building intellectual capital and unique code. They're really in the business of delivering insights to the public and solving problems. Where they struggle with right now is their inability to quickly be able to, in one example, mash up different data sets in an interoperable environment, which is secure and so forth. So what they're looking for is problem-solving capabilities, regardless of who created the code. That's really their main interest. So, as Henry mentioned, if in the course of solving these problems you develop some unique capabilities, you're free to resell that. The federal government is interested in solving a problem.
Thank you. And the final piece of the question, are there any examples so far of successful spin-outs?
Yes, there have been in a different space. So the place, we're not talking big data. So some of our current partners created products. They are currently taking those and making those commercially available. We expect that to be a process going forward. The Department of Commerce encourages the growth of the U.S. economy. So that's something we would actually encourage and consider that to be a benefit.
Thank you.
I'd like to add just a couple thoughts, Rene, to your question. One is, you heard when Henry presented did his presentation, he talked about flow-down provisions. So this becomes a particular issue when you have large groups of organizations that have combined together like the data hubs. And so I think the idea would be to have kind of a relationship with the lead organization and presume that the flow-down provisions are going to have to be dealt with by that lead organization. So I just want you to kind of, I know what that means. I worked in a university before, so I kind of know what that means. So that's one piece. The other thing I think worth pointing out to this larger group is that it's not all companies that tend to work in sort of a competitive mode. There are university partners here as well, roughly 4 of them, and one of them is actually a consortium, and that's the consortium that Renee leads. It's the NSF, National Science Foundation, has funded 4 data hubs around the country, and all 4 data hubs have come together to become a partner through Columbia University's lead, where Renee is based. So I think that can be an interesting way to leverage partnerships among the JV partners itself. So just wanted to put that out there.
A second question from me, which is related to the open source initiative that the federal government has recently put in place. Is it the intention that the efforts under NTIS JVP be part of that open source initiative, where there's a requirement that the code is maintained in an open source repository or open source process, or at all?
I think we would encourage the use of open source. That's the whole point behind leveraging emerging technologies and the greatest and the latest and greatest tools that are available. Having said that, we would still have to go through various security requirements dealing with the individual agencies that we work with to make sure that some of that is approved, and if it's not approved, understand how we separate that from their operational networks. But open source and innovation is really key to this whole thing.
I'd like to just kind of explore some other aspects of this. If you're developing code from scratch in a particular for a problem, then yes, open source might be an option. Now, there are companies here who have tremendous expertise in data science, who have proprietary capabilities, very extraordinary proprietary capabilities within this group. So if the intention of the agency for which you're working, the solution is to make data available publicly, clearly that federal data has to be made public. Does not necessarily mean all elements of the stack are public. So there can be the public layer for the stack, and there can be proprietary layers of the stack, and clearly some of the IT requirements are going to be specific to the agency, IT requirements and privacy requirements.
I think I would just reference you to code.gov, where the initiative is in place. I'm sure you're aware of it. So.
Hi, Meredith Lee, Executive Director of the West Big Data Innovation Hub, and here from UC Berkeley. I had a question following up on some of the discussion about data interoperability. If we look at people interoperability and the partners in this auditorium right here, I was wondering if you could comment on your vision and plans. I'm sure we'll have lessons learned as we're going through these individual letter agreements. Hopefully we'll have some best practices to share as well. Could you elaborate on some of the community building activities you have planned?
I think your question actually has the answer in there, because I think this is something that we really need to do, and somebody else mentioned that before. I really view our future website as much more of kind of a thought leadership, information sharing. And we've already been asked by various parts of government, especially the the OSTP Data Cabinet, which represents the data thought leadership around the government, to potentially use our website to begin to host some of these services. So the answer is yes, we need to do that. And we would hope that you would actually feel free to provide us with your continuous thoughts about that. I think over time, if I were to kind of draw a magic wand, why not have a website that is very much like a Wikipedia type approach, where we continue to build a lot of this intellectual capital and knowledge about best practices and what's happened. And all of that doesn't take away from the unique capabilities of organizations and their ability to compete. I think it's just going to help. So that's why I think this whole approach will be very transformative, and let's just continue to do this great thinking and provide us with that input.
Specifically with the letter agreements, do you have plans to make all of those available to all 35 partners?
No. So I think what will be made available to all the partners is the problem statement that is provided. And at that point, after the merit process is done, the selected organizations at NTIS will work on the problem, solve it, and maybe at the end there's a briefing that could be done as part of the events that are hosted by NTIS where JV partners can come and share their success stories and projects and maybe even some pain points and then also engage with agencies. There's nothing which prevents NTIS from hosting an organization where agencies and partners are present in an open setting. So that's all doable, and it can happen also more frequently in electronic forms. One of the other persons I was talking to at the break talked about an ideation forum. What is not proprietary is the problem statement. What is the solution is what is unique to the team that proposes it, but the problem statement is not necessarily proprietary.
NTIS has been using the joint venture partner letter agreements for years for specific projects with joint venture partners. We will be making a template JVP letter agreement available. We're close to getting that out, but as we've said, there will be specific terms and conditions in each letter agreement that would be specific to the project. We usually don't share those letters because they contain proprietary information, but you will have the general scope of what it looks like.
Also, I just want to, some of you may be thinking, what is the difference between the agreement that was sent out last Thursday that you are going to, we're going to sign, and the letter agreements, right? And I don't want to get too much into the legal aspect of it, but think about the document, the JV agreement, being the set of issues that get resolved up front that are not unique to a project. Now, and set of minimum requirements kind of deal, a framework for this relationship, the ground rules for this relationship. And then the project agreement will really rule the relationship on that project. And there may be some additional requirements unique to the project. Henry, you want to comment?
No, I just agree with that. It's one of the goals in structuring it this way is that we expect that we will not be renegotiating in a letter agreement all of the governing principles that are reflected in the joint venture partnership agreement. That is one of the ways we intend to have this go quickly to reach agreement and get going on a project, because we're not going to be negotiating from scratch. We will have already articulated our relationship and the major points of how we're going to work together in the joint venture partnership agreement. And then the letter agreement will get in, as Sham said, gets into the specifics of a particular project with reference to the joint venture agreement for other terms, or to the extent that terms are different as a result of a particular requirement from a federal agency, that will be articulated in the letter agreement as an exception to the general joint venture partner. But the goal is that we have a streamlined agreement that focuses on the problem at hand, and that we get it signed quickly and get on with the work.
And one area which might be of interest to you, concern to you, is IT security. Given the great interest, first of all, it's a data science project, so everything involves IT. So, and you know a lot about the federal requirements for IT, but not all data scientists necessarily are focused on security, right? So, and what we've tried to structure the IT requirements at the back is in a interesting way. Unless you're really operating, you should read it, but we've kind of done an if-then approach. If you're not operating an IT system or modifying an IT system, then one of those provisions may not apply. So it all depends on the particular project and what you're doing in that IT project. If you're sitting in your office or using your own tools and building up a tool to deliver to the agency, well, then the question is, who does the security plan for that tool? That can be resolved at the project level, so you're not actually committing to necessarily developing the entire security plan. However, if you're actually going to install and give it and you take on the responsibility for doing so, then we need to specify the requirements for IT security. So we've built in the flexibility in the overarching JV agreement so that it becomes easier for some of you who I don't expect universities to be necessarily doing IT security requirements. So it's just to make sure. Now, you may want to team up with another organization among the partners who can do the IT security requirements. So I just leave it out there. There's a lot of flexibility built in.
Something important to mention, because we keep on talking about the teaming among the JVPs. What we haven't talked about is the potential teaming among federal agencies. Multiple federal agencies are trying to do the same thing. Some of them may be trying to do something with Company X, another with Company Y, maybe with an academic institution. Through this collaboration, through this engagement, because it's a transparent process, 3 agencies, Census, Department of Transportation, USDA, may find out, why the heck are we trying to create a high-performance computing environment, secure, to do a lot of this analytic and data interoperability, when in fact we can work through NTIS, who has access to all of these JV partners? Maybe there's a way to actually have agencies team up with each other, with NTIS and with the JVPs. So it kind of goes both ways. It may not be apparent, the first 3, 4 months, 6 months, but the word will start to get out.
One thing that Henry mentioned in his slide, which I'd like to come back and kind of bring up, and that is that it talks about the outreach plan program that NTIS will build to agencies, and that you can be involved and participate in that process. So I would suggest that is something maybe Abhi wants to say a few words about it, but I think that, independent of a project or a problem, the idea of branding and making this new partnership more broadly known is something I think Abhi and his team are going to be thinking about a lot in the next weeks and months.
We're definitely thinking about this, but many of you are probably much better than we are at this. So feel free to provide any kind of input, suggestions as to how you would like to see this proceed. This is a partnership. I'd love to hear from you. Have we exhausted all the questions? I'm sure you'll have more questions after this. Actually, I will ask the question because I don't really know the answer to this one. As a follow-up to this meeting, people drive back home and say, I should have asked them that question. What's really the best mechanism to have a follow-on dialogue in the coming weeks, especially as they also look at the JVP agreement?
I thought visiting UC Berkeley might be nice. I thought visiting UC Berkeley might be nice, but personal preferences. No, it's a good question. I don't think we've addressed it.
If you have suggestions for what we might do, I think you should certainly bring it. I've heard a number of ideas on one-on-one conversations. Some of you are going to, have to go back and process what you've heard here. Some of it is, how you do business currently versus how this model fits in. I have a feeling you will go back and have more questions once you process what you've heard, because this is quite different than what you're used to. And if you do have those questions, please share them with Avi and Greg, because they can come back to you and provide maybe another forum so we can talk about these things after a few weeks. But that is something you should really think about.
I'd just say, with respect to the joint venture agreements that you have in your hands right now, my expectation is that if you have any sense, it will work its way to your legal office at some point, and those folks I would expect to have questions. So from our perspective, over the next week or two, we would certainly, my office, the legal office, would certainly be willing to put a conference call together or something to get your legal folks on the line with their questions or whatever. And so I'll just say again that when you do share it with your legal folks, don't hesitate to remind them that if it's signed as is, it won't require an additional layer of legal review on this end, and it will go much more quickly. I mean, we are willing, of course, to negotiate with you if it's absolutely necessary, but that process, that slows things down, those kinds of negotiations. So. But we are happy to set up an opportunity for your legal folks to talk with our legal folks and address questions about the joint venture agreement.
Just a short question on that. Is it the intent that everybody signs the same agreement, so we should wait and not sign it if it's already passed our legal, but it hasn't passed?
It's certainly my office's intent that everybody signs the same agreement.
Okay, so we should delay a little bit, I think, it sounds like.
But that's, your legal folks need to be comfortable with that. But again, the joint venture agreement is an overarching agreement, and when we get to individual letter agreements dealing with individual projects, there we expect to deal with whatever's going on in that particular project, and that will require some negotiation. As Melissa said, we will be sending out a template to try again to minimize the amount of time that it takes us to put these letter agreements together. But we do, our goal is that the joint venture agreement is at a high enough level. We will be talking, and it will describe in the roles and responsibilities section, which I didn't really put up on the screen, the respective roles and responsibilities of us, NTIS, and the joint venture partner, and lay out a pricing approach to pricing. So that's going to be in there as well. But we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty details that one would expect to get into in an individual letter agreement. So we're hopeful that we won't have to negotiate every single one of these joint venture agreements separately.
So Henry, Melissa, and team on the legal, anything that's programmatic, the other types of questions that you've asked us, if you can just direct them, our point of contact is Greg. If you can just direct that by email directly to Greg, and then we will discuss this amongst ourselves and also decide, I believe, whether we should, if it's a common question, maybe we should just publish it to everyone. I think everyone would be interested. Any other questions? All right, I think this was a pretty informative session. Again, I want to thank all of you. Some of you probably came from out of town, made a special trip to be here on Monday. I really appreciate you coming here. Really excited about finally getting started and working with you. I hope you recognize that this is truly a unique opportunity to innovate with the federal government. And let me just say again, thank you to everyone. Thank you to the Department of Commerce for hosting us here. Thank you to my NTIS team, the people on the audiovisual side of the house and public relations who've been working with us. Special thanks to Sham, Henry, Melissa, Greg, and others who have been so instrumental in getting us to where we are today. When you think about that, and since July, I think that's pretty impressive. Government usually doesn't operate like this. So we've made a lot of progress, and we really look forward to the next stage of getting some stuff done with you. Thank you, everyone.
Gentlemen.